Just weeks before our wedding, my fiancé blindsided me with a request to open our relationship. A shock compounded by the discovery that his friends had been subtly manipulating him for months. For 5 years, Jonah had been my rock, the steady constant in a life that had felt, until meeting him, as though it was always teetering between my conservative family's demands and my own desire to break free. We'd met in college, and it was almost impossible now to remember who I'd been before him. In Jonah, I'd found someone who understood my need for escape, who'd helped me make decisions my family never would have approved of. When I switched from a practical major to pursue my passion in the arts, it was Jonah who had given me the courage, telling me that I deserved to make choices for myself. He had believed in me more than anyone else ever had, even more than I'd believed in myself. By the time we graduated, we had a life plan that felt foolproof. Jonah and I would move in together. He'd work his way up in his field, and I'd explore mine with his support. We'd talked about marriage, and I'd imagined us building a family together, raising kids who'd have the freedom to make their own choices. When he proposed, there was no hesitation on my end. This was the life I wanted. Yet over the last few months, things had started to feel different. It began with small things. Late-night phone calls that Jonah would step outside to take, moments when he'd grow distant for no apparent reason, and his constant meetings with his old friends, Lane and Aaron. I knew Lane and Aaron had been a part of Jonah's life long before I'd entered it. He met them when he was 15, during a time when he felt most alone. Jonah's family was strict, with unyielding rules, and he had spent his teenage years rebelling against them, feeling as though he had nowhere to turn. Lane and Aaron had offered him a home in that dark period, a sanctuary where he could be himself without judgment. Over time, they became not only his friends, but also his mentors, people he looked up to with almost reverent admiration. To Jonah, they were family. I remember the first time Jonah had brought me to meet them. We'd been dating for a few months, and Jonah was eager to introduce me to the people who had been his safety net. He'd spoken of Lane and Aaron as though they were sages, wise souls who'd helped him become the man he was. I was nervous, but also excited to meet these two who had been such a huge part of his life. But the moment we walked in, I sensed an immediate tension. Lane had looked at me with a smile that didn't reach their eyes, and Aaron's polite nod felt more like a formality than a genuine greeting. As the night went on, their disapproval became evident. Lane made subtle comments about my traditional values and mainstream ambitions, always delivered with a smile, but cutting all the same. Aaron was quieter but distant, watching me as though I were an intruder. At one point, Lane asked me if I'd ever considered a more free-form approach to life, one that wasn't tied to conventional standards or societal expectations. I tried to laugh it off, but their judgment was palpable. I'd hoped that Jonah would notice, that he'd defend me, but he just brushed it off, saying, "That's just how they are with new people. They need time to warm up to you." I had tried to believe him, tried to shrug it off as his friends being protective. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that they thought I wasn't good enough for Jonah, that I didn't belong in their world. Over the years, Lane and Aaron became a quiet but constant presence in our relationship, like a shadow I couldn't escape. Whenever Jonah and I faced challenges, he'd turn to them for advice, often coming back with ideas and philosophies that didn't quite align with the life we were building. He'd tell me that Lane had helped him see things from a higher perspective, or that Aaron's view on relationships had changed his outlook. I tried to be understanding, to respect the importance they held in his life, but it often left me feeling like an outsider, as though our love wasn't quite enough for him. Then, last week, everything came crashing down. Jonah came home looking thoughtful and a little nervous and asked me to sit down. I remember the way he looked at me, his eyes filled with an intensity I hadn't seen before. He took a deep breath and asked if I'd ever consider opening our relationship. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. For 5 years, Jonah and I had built a life together, one founded on trust, commitment, and the promise of a future together. And now, just a few months before our wedding, he was suggesting we bring other people into our relationship. The very idea felt like a betrayal, a shattering of the foundation we'd built together. "Why now?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "We're supposed to be planning our future, Jonah. Why would you want to change everything now?" Jonah looked down, his expression unreadable. I feel like I have so much love to give, and it doesn't feel fair to keep it all in one place. I don't want to limit myself, or you for that matter. His words felt hollow, rehearsed, as though he were reciting a philosophy that wasn't truly his own. This wasn't the Jonah I knew, the man who had once told me that he didn't need anyone else. A strange thought crossed my mind, a suspicion I had tried to ignore for months. Ever since Jonah had started spending more time with Lane and Aaron, he had changed. Little by little, they had influenced his outlook, nudging him toward their alternative lifestyle, a life free from the constraints of conventional relationships. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lane and Aaron were behind this sudden shift. Jonah and I had always been happy together, content in the life we were building. But now, just as we were about to commit to each other fully, he was questioning everything. It felt as though they had planted seeds of doubt in his mind, convincing him that our love wasn't enough. The tension in our home was palpable. I tried to go about my daily routines, but every time I looked at Jonah, I felt a pang of betrayal. I reached out to friends, hoping they'd offer comfort, but they dismissed my concerns, saying Jonah was probably just nervous about commitment. They didn't understand the history, didn't see the cracks that had been forming for months. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I messaged Jonah, telling him we needed to talk, and that evening, we sat down in our dimly lit living room, the silence between us heavy and uncomfortable. I had spent hours preparing for this conversation, crafting careful sentences in my mind. But the moment I started speaking, all my carefully chosen words fell apart. "Jonah, I feel like you're slipping away from me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're supposed to be planning our future together, and now you're talking about exploring other connections? It feels like a betrayal." Jonah looked away, his expression troubled. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Ivy. I feel like there's so much more I need to discover about myself. I don't want to be confined by expectations." His words stung, as though he were implying that our relationship was a box he needed to escape. Expectations? Jonah, we've spent years building a life together. We've talked about marriage, about growing old together. How is that confining? He sighed, looking down at his hands. "I don't know. Maybe I'm just scared. I've always done what everyone else expected of me, and now, for the first time, I want to find out who I am." The pain in his voice was palpable, and for a moment I felt a pang of sympathy. Jonah had spent his life fighting against other people's expectations, and maybe in some way he felt like our relationship was just another set of rules. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Lane and Aaron were behind this, that they had planted these ideas in his head. "Have you talked to Lane and Aaron about this?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Jonah hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, they've been helping me work through some things. They get me in a way no one else does." His words felt like a punch to the gut. "I thought I was the person who got you, Jonah. We're supposed to be partners. Why couldn't you come to me?" He didn't answer, and in the silence that followed, I felt a wave of anger and betrayal. I thought about the late-night calls, the times he'd ended conversations abruptly when I entered the room, the hours he spent talking to Lane and Aaron about things he should have shared with me. It was as though they were pulling him away, leading him down a path I couldn't follow. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship, trying to understand where things had gone wrong. I thought about the first time Jonah told me he loved me, how he'd been so nervous, stumbling over his words. We were sitting under a starlit sky, miles from campus, wrapped in each other's arms. It felt like something out of a movie, perfect and surreal. I remember thinking, in that moment, that I'd found my forever. But now, forever felt like an illusion. The next morning, I confronted Jonah again, asking to see his phone. It was a moment of desperation, a need for clarity I couldn't ignore. Jonah looked taken aback, but handed it over without hesitation. We had always trusted each other. We didn't monitor each other's messages or calls, but this time, I needed answers. I scrolled through his messages, finding nothing out of the ordinary. Then I checked his call logs, and there it was. hours upon hours of conversations with Lane and Aaron, stretching back months. Some calls lasted well into the night, far longer than any casual chat. "Why?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Why are you talking to them so much?" Jonah looked at me, guilt flashing across his face. "They're helping me understand things I didn't even know were there. They get me in a way no one else does." His words felt like a slap. "I thought I was the person who got you, Jonah. We're supposed to be partners. Why couldn't you come to me?" He hesitated, then said, "I didn't want to hurt you, but they're helping me see parts of myself I've buried for years." The answer wasn't enough, but I didn't have the strength to argue anymore. We went to bed in silence, and as he held me, I wondered if this was the last night we'd spend together as a couple. The next morning, Jonah was gone. He left a note on the kitchen counter saying he needed space to figure things out, that he'd be back when he was ready. I felt a wave of panic, a sense of abandonment that I couldn't shake. I called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted him, begging him to come back, to talk to me, but there was no response. In a fit of desperation, I reached out to Lane, hoping they might give me some answers. They answered with a casual tone, as though my pain was a minor inconvenience. "Jonah's going through a transformation," they said, almost as if they were reciting a mantra. "He needs to explore himself without limitations, to break free from the constraints of monogamy." Oh, I felt a surge of anger. Constraints? We were building a life together, Lane. You filled his head with these ideas, convinced him that our love is a box he needs to escape. Lane chuckled softly. "Love should be boundless, Ivy. Maybe one day you'll understand that." I hung up, feeling more alone than ever. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no word from Jonah. I clung to memories of us, of the life we'd planned, hoping that he'd come back and realize what we had. But as time passed, I began to accept that the man I loved might be gone for good. One evening, I came home to find an envelope on the doormat. Inside was a letter from Jonah, written in his familiar scrawl. I opened it, my hands trembling. "I'm sorry, Ivy. I know this isn't fair to you, and I wish things were different. I didn't plan for it to happen this way, but I can't go back. I need to find out who I am, and I can't do that within the boundaries of our relationship. Please don't think this is about you. You've been nothing but loving and supportive. I just need to figure out who I am. Outside of us. Love always. Jonah." The letter slipped from my hands, and I sank onto the floor, feeling the weight of his words. It felt like an ending, a slow, painful goodbye. And as I sat there, alone in the apartment we had once shared, I realized that the man I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who needed a life I couldn't give him. Commentary time. This story is heartbreaking as it captures the painful journey of watching a partner drift away, influenced by external voices and personal struggles. Ivy's relationship with Jonah had been built on mutual support and understanding, with both finding solace and growth in each other amidst the pressures of life. Their shared history and dreams for a future together were rooted in love and trust, which makes Jonah's sudden change of heart all the more devastating. The influence of his friends, Lane and Aaron, adds a haunting layer to this story, showing how individuals outside a relationship can slowly shape the course of another's life, even to the point of unraveling the most solid connections. Ivy's loyalty to Jonah is commendable, but she also seems aware that, while Jonah's journey to self-discovery is valid, it doesn't justify the abandonment she endured. The heartache of realizing that love, as deep as hers, was not enough to keep him grounded is deeply relatable. Jonah's decision to leave right before their wedding, after years of being her support, reveals a man struggling with his own identity and unable to find a balance within the boundaries they had established together. Lane and Aaron's perspective on boundless love adds an intriguing dimension, but also poses ethical questions. Their approach might work for some, but they seem to have crossed a boundary by planting seeds of doubt in Jonah's mind, without regard for Ivy's feelings or the stability she and Jonah had built together. Ivy's resilience in the face of betrayal shines through, and her reflection on the lost relationship is both a testament to her strength and a reminder of how people grow apart, even after years of shared love and dreams. It's a sobering tale that underscores the importance of self-awareness, communication, and boundaries in maintaining a lasting relationship. Thanks for tuning into this story about love, loss, and resilience. If you found Ivy's journey as moving as I did, please share your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more stories on relationships and personal growth. See you in the next one!